Hello, and welcome to the Six Figure Developer Podcast, the podcast where we talk about new and exciting technologies, professional development, clean code, career advancement, and more. I'm John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I'm John Ash.
With us today is Phil Hack. Phil is the founder of Hacked LLC, where he coaches software organizations to become the best versions of themselves. To do this, Phil draws upon his over 20 years of experience in the software industry. Most recently, he was a director of engineering at GitHub and helped make GitHub friendly to developers on the Microsoft platform. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you for having me.
So getting started, would you just give us a little bit of a background for yourself, maybe like how you got started in the industry?
Sure. When I was 4 years old, my dad bought me a TRS-80 color computer, and that was it. It had me hooked for the rest of my life. Professionally, that's when I first started programming. Professionally, I started when I graduated from college in LA, and I needed a job because I was poor and broke. I was a math major. And so it's like, I'll take a job before I go back, and get my PhD. Because that was like always the plan, is to, go back to school. But then I got a job at a little consulting firm that did, classic ASP. So not ASP.NET, ASP, VB Script, SQL Server 4, that sort of thing. And I was hooked, building web applications. Did several jobs. The most notable positions I've had were at Microsoft as the program manager for ASP.NET MVC and NuGet. Both of those were open source, kind of in the early days of Microsoft's foray into open source. And then after that, I joined GitHub, where I started off as a programmer building a GitHub for Windows using WPF, C#. But then over time, kind of expanded my role and became eventually the director of client applications over there. That includes Atom, the text editor, Electron, GitHub Desktop, which is now an Electron app for Mac and Windows. And then we built a bunch of tools for Visual Studio Code, Unity, for basically extending editors to make them integrate with GitHub. And then now I am just kind of self-employed, working as a consultant, and relaxing, staying at home a lot, and taking care of the family, that kind of thing.
So how go ahead. Yeah, how have you enjoyed your transition into that consulting role, and what really kind of spurred you on?
I had a lot of stress in my previous position, so near the end, and I was, a lot of people are like, "Oh, Microsoft bought GitHub, and then you left," and I was like, actually, I was very excited about that, but I also really needed a break, and so, and I had a friend who introduced me to his friend, who's like, they're a small company, kind of like early GitHub. They really need engineering leadership help. They wanted to hire a VP of engineering, and I told them, I'm not really interested in taking on that kind of stress, but maybe I can help you find someone. And it kind of turned into a role where I was just sort of giving them I was working with the CTO, and I was giving him all sorts of advice about how to build and grow and scale an engineering org that's that gets the best out of people, that's diverse and inclusive. And and it turned out that I actually enjoyed doing that. So I work on per the advice of a good friend of mine, I work on a retainer basis. So I asked him, so what do I charge these people? And he's like, well, the thing about you, when you have that breadth of experience, you don't want to charge people for your time. You want to charge people for the value you provide for them, right? Like, which is honestly true of every, software engineer or, someone in that field, where you really want to charge for the value, charge for your experience and your expertise. And so, we worked out a deal where I charge them a monthly fee, and then, we have a meeting a week, and then they can hit me up in Slack or email or whatever they want. And I really like it now because it's it isn't really stressful for me, because I'll be in a situation where I'm like, yeah, you need to have this really difficult conversation with that person because they were in the wrong. Like, you need to find out what's wrong. Have this challenging conversation where either they need to stay or go. Good luck. Tell me how it goes.
So did you always, or did you have the vision or desire to sort of own your own business and do that? Or was that just sort of like you kind of came across it one day and you're like, hey, let's just go and do it?
I'd say the latter. Like, I kind of fell into it. I think, I've always liked working for myself because, at least it's a boss that, may be an idiot, but I can stand in. And, like, I find this good. Like, when you work for other people, like, there's a lot of, constellations you have to make. And usually that's that could be a good thing, but sometimes it's nice to be able to, experiment with a company with your own ideas. But I think where my heart would be to, build a product company again at some point. Right now I look at this as sort of a sabbatical more than me starting a new business.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah, I think we first reached out to you around the time when the deal with Microsoft purchasing GitHub or acquiring GitHub was announced, and you just politely declined or said that you were busy, of course, with the acquisition. And then shortly thereafter, I think maybe you tweeted or something that you were going to be a stay-at-home dad, and
so I had no excuse.
Right. Like, wait a minute. So I can only imagine the amount of moving parts that an acquisition of that size has, and the day-to-day stress that involved in something like that.
Yeah. But a lot of people, if you've never gone through one, like, the thing that I learned, and I assume from what I hear this is pretty common, is you go through this period where it's announced but it hasn't yet closed. And then like, that period is stressful for a very different reason depending on where you're at in the company, right? Because if you're at the highest levels, you're actually working the deal and figuring all this stuff out. But if you're lower down, you realize, like, they don't want you to do anything to mess it up. And so, we're working on some, wild ideas, and we're like, okay, maybe shut those down. Just keep the ship floating. Mm. And I found that really actually stressful because I've been wanting to do all these things. And so it was more like, hey, babysit this org for a while. Mm. And I think that made me, that kind of burnt me out a little bit. Not from the amount of work, but from the kind of having to hold back, all the amazing things we could be doing.
Yeah, I think the day-to-day drudgery burns people out more than being able to play with new and exciting things. The getting to play is what keeps a lot of developers from burning out, and then having to hit the brakes. That's got to be hard.
Well, yeah, you're exactly right. It's when you have autonomy and a sense of purpose and mastery. I'm quoting Dan Pink here. Those are the things that they found to really motivate people. Yeah, you could work very few hours, but be doing something that just isn't interesting to you, and that could burn you out. Yeah.
So you were at Microsoft during some very exciting times when things started to become open source. Mm-hmm. Were you involved in those conversations, or how did you what was your role, and how did you see the change internally and both perceived from the community, from Microsoft transitioning from the $$ to the open source friendly Microsoft of today?
Yeah, I was involved. So the project ASP.NET MVC, it was somewhat of a response to Ruby on Rails and other things going on in the .NET community and the overall community. There was monorail already out. And I remember, we were, I was fortunate to be recruited by Scott Guthrie to work there. And, I could see that he was trying to, build a kind of a different way of working with the community, right? A little bit more involved with the community. And I remember I had been plotting with Miguel de Casa, who I'd met at one of the Mix conferences way back when, because I really wanted to make this pitch that, at that time, we were giving the source code away for MVC, but it wasn't under an open source library license. I think it was at the time, because these were previews, we just had some sort of restrictive license, but you could see the source code. And I really wanted to do it full out and, make a proper open source license and accept contributions. And I, talked to Miguel, and I was like, how do I make this pitch? Let's brainstorm. And so I got this strong argument together, and went into Scott Guthrie's office, and I was like, a little, I don't know why, I was a little afraid, and I was like, okay, here's what I think we should do. Here's why. And he's like, great, yeah, I've already been talking to this marketing Brian Goldfarb about this, and we're thinking that blah blah blah. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes that easy.
So it was all your idea, and now here we are.
No, I wouldn't say it was all my idea. There was a lot of other open source things going on within that group. Yeah, there was Meth before that. There was Wix, credit where credit's due. There was the shared source library, which wasn't quite open source, but it's led the way. What was unique about ASP.NET MVC is that it was considered part of the .NET framework, even though it shipped out of band. So we were kind of blazing the trail of shipping parts of the framework out of band. And it was the first open source product from Microsoft that I'm aware of that was fully supported as part of the .NET framework. So we gave the full 10-year support. And I think it was the first open source product in version 3, if I remember correctly, where we shipped a third-party open source library as part of the product, jQuery. It had a couple of first in terms of Microsoft's open source involvement, but there was a lot of other teams kind of pushing the envelope then too.
So what was it like getting jQuery shipped with MVC? Was that a difficult thing to do, or were you just like, hey, let's do this, and they're like, sure, why not?
So it was interesting because back then, every release that we did under an open source library required patent review and IP review. And I remember every IP review, if I remember correctly, was like $10,000. So every time we wanted to do a release, we had to pay some other third party to scrub it and tell us if there's anything in there that shouldn't be in there. And with jQuery, it was, a lot of time working with the lawyers. One thing I'll say is I really love the lawyers over at Microsoft. I know that sounds strange for a programmer to say. But at least within the group we had, a lot of times people feel like, oh, developers who just want to ship have this antagonistic relationship with the lawyers who just want to protect you. And I remember Guthrie had kind of set me straight on that. He was like, he had this really great way of looking at it. He's like, look, the lawyers are not here to tell us what to ship or what not to ship. They're here to protect the business, but they also are here to support the business. And so, when we need to do something because we know it's right, what they need to do is say, okay, how can we help you accomplish that? Not no. He's like, they can't tell us no. They can just tell us, here's how to do it safely. And so I take that. I've talked to people at other companies, that are way more restrictive about open source, and I often hear that phrase, oh, the lawyers won't let us. And I think that's probably what I said. The lawyers won't let us. And Scott was like, no, they'll let us. They don't get a say. They're here to support the business. And so that's been advice I've been giving others is your legal team should not be your gatekeepers. They should be your partners in figuring out how to release it. Anyways, we ended up, for jQuery, we ended up spending a ton of time, going through it, working with John Resig, who was great to work with. Because we might, like I don't remember if we did, but like let's say we found a piece of code that was like, oh, that looks like that violates this copyright, but it's non-trivial. Like, can you just rewrite it, or something like that? Yeah. And I remember I got to meet him because Microsoft invited him out to, I think, the next Mix conference after when we released that version that included jQuery.
So you moved from Microsoft to GitHub. What was the sort of the difference? Could you contrast some of the differences or similarities? What you enjoyed about working for either one of those companies?
Oh yeah, I mean, I went from 100,000 person company to a 50-person company. So that right there was a huge, difference, culture shock. Just in terms of the lack of structure, the lack of bureaucracy. And part of the thing is I was a program manager over at Microsoft. So I spent a lot of my days in meetings, and there's a lot of overhead to shipping a product at Microsoft. Like you had the good overhead though, but like, I got to meet with the translators to make sure that we get the 9 translations done at the same time that we ship, got to meet with the scaling folks to make sure we get lab time to run it in ensured scales, and the security reviews and the things. And when, going to GitHub, it was a refreshing change. Just write this code and we test it a bit and ship it out. Now, that wasn't necessarily great for like the customers, but it was a different scale of the problem. And the other aspect of the change is I went from being a program manager to being a developer. So back to software development, and I got to write code like all day, every day. And, I really enjoyed just like really kind of diving into that and being able to focus on building code and, shaping a product that like had users. And I remember like one of the most at a loss of words. One of the things that I remember the most was, when I was Microsoft, especially back then, this is before they turned the corner on the open source and Azure and are now beloved, right? Like it didn't matter. I was in charge of 2 products that were actually very, very popular among developers, among the Microsoft developer audience. And even so, every time I shipped something, I just had to steel myself for all the negative comments I was going to get, some of them directed at me for a product I shipped, right? Like calling me things. And I was just like, okay. People are upset that I shipped a new thing, but okay. And so when we shipped the first version of GitHub for Windows, I was like, okay, steel yourself. Here it comes, And it was just like, hearts and love and rainbows and glitter and unicorns, everything. And I was like, okay, where are the people shitting on? Oh, sorry. This is a live stream. Okay, where are the people crapping on this? Like, where are the haters? Where are the naysayers? And it didn't happen. Now, over time, it's GitHub was also very small, but over time, obviously that comes in. But even so, GitHub has maintained such a huge approval rating. I remember looking at some survey where they looked at the most, the companies that developers most appreciate or favor, and GitHub was at the top with the obscene rating. So that was a nice change.
And you've been working on a book related to GitHub as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, in fact, it just shipped. It's available on Amazon now. It's part of the classic Learn Anything for Dummies type of book. So it's a GitHub for Dummies. It's part of the Wiley for Dummies series, and I wrote it with my co-author Sarah Guthels. She actually was a manager of one of my teams. She managed the editor tools team over at GitHub. So, between 2 of us, we have a lot of experience with GitHub. She happens to be over at Microsoft. which of course everyone at GitHub is at Microsoft now. But I mean, she's actually at Microsoft proper now. She transitioned over there. But yeah, so we targeting the book towards people who are either you're new to programming or you've been programming but you're new to GitHub. You might know other version control systems. I think there are some tips in there that are even great for experienced users of GitHub, because a lot of times what I've learned is like a lot of people who've used GitHub for a long time, they find there are 3 or 4 features and then that's the only thing they use. And I was showing someone a group of people who were all like expert programmers, that you can now suggest edits in a pull request. And they're like, oh, this is great. I didn't know this here. Yeah, it was only shipped like last year. But, and it's the nature of a product that big and that encompassing. But, I'm hoping that the book will kind of show people a good workflow through using GitHub. And we also have chapters dedicated to maintainers and to contributors. And to contributors, we say, hey, don't be an entitled jerk. That's like the only page. Don't be an entitled jerk.
Nice.
So recently, just when you thought you had maybe gotten away, they pulled you back in, and it looks like you joined the .Net Foundation. Could you talk? Well, first off, would you actually just explain a little bit to people who might not be familiar with it, what it is and sort of what it means to you, and kind of what you'll be able to do there?
Sure. So the .NET Foundation is an independent foundation, initially started by Microsoft, but generally runs independently of Microsoft. They obviously, as the founding members, they have like I think a permanent seat on the board and whatnot. But the goal of the foundation is to really foster and grow .NET open source. And they are doing it in a very real way. For example, the .NET Core, .NET, all the .NET projects are under the foundation. They're actually owned by the foundation. So it's early though. Like we would love to be sort of like the Apache Foundation for the .NET space, right? Where we could really, grow a set of services. Like for example, if you need code signing, I think we offer that for projects. I'm still kind of learning like all the things we offer.
Okay.
But like we're trying to improve it. It's not really that well known yet amongst .NET developers of like why should you join if you're not a project, for example, because like you can have an individual membership that helps support the activities of the foundation. But we want to support speakers going around. We want to support all kinds of things. So the board right now is kind of in a planning phase, trying to figure out like how do we support all these things? How do we get more people involved in it? So that'll be one thing I'll say is like, it's been quiet since the election happened. But part of that is, when you put together a new board and a new foundation, like we're figuring out we're working on how to work. And, the way I was putting it to the others is we're trying to build a playbook for future boards. What's funny is like, I felt like we were going real slow. So I pitched, hey, let's use GitHub to do this because that's what all our projects are going to do. And that's been actually working out pretty well. Like some folks don't like using the Markdown editor in GitHub. And I'm like, okay, I know it's not the best, but at least we're using the same tools that all our projects are using. And that's where the suggested edits blog post came from, and the discussions. I wrote today about team discussions. Like nobody knows that that's in there, and I was like, that's actually, instead of sending us each other emails that we don't read, we could actually have discussions within GitHub. And the reason why I joined the board was like, in a way, like this, like I had kind of, my role has kind of stepped away from .NET quite a bit at GitHub because, like my teams were building Electron apps. I had one team building extensions for Visual Studio. They were the only team writing C#. But I've always liked the .NET community. I've always liked the products that we built. And in a way, it's kind of like a way to protect the legacy of .NET ASP.NET MVC and NuGet is to be on the foundation and really see it transition into a community-run project and a community-run foundation.
All right. So currently, you're doing your LLC, Hacked LLC, but you said you kind of fell into that, and you hinted that you had more that you wanted to do. So what do you think's next for you?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm kind of figuring that along. I've been thinking, for now, I kind of like the pace. Like I've been wanting to put together a workshop or two and maybe do some of those at conferences. I speak at conferences here and there. I'm interested in, occasionally doing paid speaking if companies want me to come out rather than consult with me, but, come out, give a talk about, the lessons learned from GitHub. Like my pitch, for the consulting firm was when I joined GitHub, we were 50. We grew to 950. We ran into a lot of challenges, like growing an engineering org like that. Because, we had no managers when I joined. And then we instituted management, leadership, directors, all that. But, we ended up selling for $7.5 billion. So if you're on a similar trajectory and want some leadership advice, I can tell you what we did wrong and I can tell you what we did right. And that seems to be a pitch that I think resonates with my clients, at least.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique position that I'm sure many companies would really enjoy being in.
Yeah, but over in the longer run, I think I'd like to, come up with a product that I believe in, developing and building, and start a company that takes that, does some good in the world with that product,
and then sell it to Microsoft for $7 billion.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, they bought GitHub just to get you back. So, if you started your own business, I'm sure they'll buy that one to get you back as well.
Yeah, they can try again.
Just to wrap up, we always ask people to kind of give some words of wisdom, and you obviously were brand new yourself, and then you've had lots, I'm sure, many junior developers and people just kind of just learning. What kind of words of wisdom, what kind of advice can you give to someone who's just starting out and trying to improve and kind of make it for themselves?
That's a great question. When you look around and see who are the developers you've heard of, right? Who are the ones who seem to have these really successful careers? And one of the things you'll learn is that they're really amazing communicators. Technical skill, there's a lot of technical skill out there, but you could have all the right answers, but no one will listen to you, and then you're not effective, right? And people don't care about your skill so much as how much value and how effective are you. And so, if I was to give a book recommendation, for example, I would recommend a book called Difficult Conversations, How to Talk About What Really Matters. And this book really, I talk about it a lot because it really affected me and helped me get through some really challenging situations, when I was at GitHub. And I found that, it gives you the tools to really get your ideas across and work through conflicts that are always going to arise. And you learn a sense of perspective that, sometimes people are like, oh, the conversation should just be about the tech, there's one right answer. And it's like, no, there's never one right answer. There's a right answer based on your context and the situation. And someone else might have a different context and situation in their mind. And so, if you get really good at that, you really make great progress in your career.
Okay. Are there any other resources you might be able to point people to?
There's a GitHub for Dummies book. So it's funny because I think a lot about leadership these days. So Creativity Inc. is a book that I found really interesting in terms of trying to build an environment where the best ideas come out. But if you're for programmers, like strictly programming, I mean, one of my favorite books of all time was Code Complete when I first read it. Because I was kind of like, I got the job. I was like, I'm really a math guy. I'm just going to do this and make ends meet. But I was just like hacking and slashing code together, true to my name. And it wasn't until I read Code Complete that I saw it as like a craft. It's like, and like you can pay attention to these things. Like you can get better at this. You can practice this. So Code Complete was one of those books that really changed the way I think about and write code. Another one was Refactoring by Martin Fowler. I really like books that recognize that people are going to make mistakes and not do things right the first time, or do things right the first time, but your circumstances and requirements will change. And so having tools to correct things is really great.
Yeah, those are excellent. How about either social media accounts or other things? If someone wants to follow you or kind of hear more about some of the blog posts that you're doing, kind of what are the plugs that you can give where they can pick those things up?
Oh yeah, I'm at Hacked on Twitter, HAACKED. I'm pretty much have that handle everywhere. So I'm Hacked on GitHub, Hacked on LinkedIn, Hacked on I don't know, MySpace. Probably not there. And I also write my blog at hacked.com.
Okay, hacked.com. All right. Do you have any speaking engagements published?
Oh.
Lost him for a second.
Yeah, you blanked that there. So my next speaking engagement so far is in October. I'll be speaking at the Caribbean Developers Conference in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Nice. I know how to pick them.
Very nice. All right. Thanks, Phil. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
That was Phil Hack. Phil is the founder of Hacked LLC, where he coaches software organizations to become the best versions of themselves. To do this, Phil draws upon his over 20 years of experience in the software industry. Most recently, he was a director of engineering at GitHub and helped make GitHub friendly to developers on the Microsoft platform.
If you like this episode, please like, rate, and review on iTunes.
Find show notes, blog posts, and more at sixfiguredev.com.
And be sure to follow us on Twitter at sixfiguredev.
This has been another episode of the Six Figure Developer Podcast, helping others reach their potential. I am John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I am John Ash.